Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Growth Show. I'm joined with Tom Pickering today, David Barclay, and a special guest, James Harrison. We are going to be exploring consulting and some of the challenges that come between being a consulting firm working for a client. So James, firstly, thanks for being with us. Can you give us a bit of background on what you do currently now, and then we'll burst into some questions around it.
Of course, thank you, Nick. So I work at the moment for a company called Virtual Clarity. We're a niche IT specialist company working in advisory for clients looking to understand how to move to the cloud or how to maximize the return on investment from their IT services and estate. So we spend a lot of our time with our clients at the start of a transformational journey. We then work closely with our parent company, DXC Technology, to provide the IT outsourcing and other service integration services that might come as a result of a transformation. But my role is the lead for Europe around economic value management. So that's generally the sort of first part of the journey, and that's the understanding of the total cost of ownership around IT services within an organization. So that gives the clarity on how the services are being consumed within an organization. And then we use a series of landing zones. Could that be hybrid cloud or full cloud or even on premises, depending on the transformation journey that the client is seeking to undertake, to estimate the future cost of ownership. And we use all sorts of industry data and experience from previous clients to benchmark and understand those costs for that client so that they can choose the right business case for them in terms of that transformation move to the cloud.
Okay, so in that role, is that predominantly working with the tech teams and the CFO and actually sort of building the models? So there's
it is, yes.
Detail, right, okay.
So my role, because it's economic value management, it's around those financial costs. So we use the Technology Business Management Council's taxonomy, it's the industry standard around cost pooling for IT services. We then use the data from our clients plus the data that we've got from historic engagements and the wider industry to be able to analyze how the spend of that IT service within that organization is being attributed and identify areas where we can drive cost out of the organization and increase that return on investment or generate a business case to move to a new model and therefore save money for that organization. That means obviously that the CFO is actively engaged because ultimately he's the man with the checkbook, but obviously we're working with the CIO because he's providing those services back into the organization. What we're seeing at the moment though is a real trend within industry for that clarity and transparency of cost to be able to provide what we call a showback or a chargeback model to business units and pass that ownership for IT back out to the functional areas of the business and away from the IT services group itself. So IT might deliver those services on behalf of the business units, but the business units will be responsible for ensuring that they're getting that return on investment and that is cost effective.
Right, okay. And that sounds like a challenge that most businesses are not so well equipped to deal with. I mean, they've got all the components, but bringing it together to actually work out return on investment seems very challenging.
Absolutely. So what we see a lot of the time is that organizations have an idea of what their IT spend is, but it's not allocated out into cost pools that can be analyzed in a way that takes it down to the application level. So if you look at someone like the finance department, they may have bespoke finance software. That's not used by your HR department, but the two departments would have differing budgets to be able to operate. If it's all sitting within the IT services budget, understanding what the cost of that application for finance in comparison to maybe the HR payroll system, which is used to generate pay slips or to view a pay slip by everybody across an organization, you'll see a different cost per head for that service. But an organization struggles to understand that if they don't have that clarity and transparency of their total cost of ownership. So that's where we come in. We come in and analyze those numbers for them. We break those down across some very specialist tools that we have within our practice. And then we feed that back to the client so they can make an informed, data-driven decision on how they should transform, if they should transform, and where their journey is in terms of their IT strategy.
Okay, and how have you seen that sort of impacting delivering projects from there? Because one of the reasons I thought it was interesting to get you on is I've seen you deliver large-scale projects numerous times, and you got an exceptional reputation for it. How, now you're doing more of this, how does that impact the delivery of projects?
Well, what we found is that actually it allows to be a much more informed method of delivery, because you can choose the aspects within the delivery of an IT transformation that drive the maximum return on investment upfront. Because you've got that understanding of those applications at that granular level, you can start to consider which ones you move to the cloud, or which ones you move to a hybrid, or which ones you keep on premise at the right time in your transformational journey. So it's not just about moving a block of applications to the cloud. You take the right ones and move them at the right stage in your transformational journey to make sure that you're getting that return on investment. So it becomes a slightly different structure from that perspective, and it's much more informed to drive value back into the business.
Right, okay, yeah, and get more buy-in across the business from the
Absolutely.
sort of evidence-based approach. Where do you see most consulting projects break down between the consulting firm and the client?
Historically, the thing that I'm seeing is probably ownership. And that's because there's a feeling within an organization that you bring in a consultant as an expert and hand over the reins for that transformation and that change to that organization. And it's almost a hands-off approach with some organizations and leadership, because they think we've got this big consultancy in, we're paying them a large amount of money to undertake this change for us. And it's a bit, in my view, like undertaking weight loss. You can go out and hire yourself a personal trainer. You could get yourself a nutritionist and buy ready-made meals. But ultimately, if you want to change, it has to be driven by yourself. You have to take ownership of that change, because the personal trainer will stand there and look at you and tell you what to do. But unless you do some of those activities for yourself, nothing will ever change. And the same happens within a corporation. You can't just hand it all over to a consultancy organization and expect the return in terms of those benefits and those outcomes, unless you as an organization also accept that you've got to change the way you're doing things and actually take some leadership and ownership of that change and transformational journey for yourselves.
Right, and from your approach, how do you counter some of those problems?
So I've spent last several years working with senior execs, actually helping to coach them in terms of their understanding of the leadership aspects of change. So how to communicate to their subordinates and to those business units, and to gain that buy-in and that trust from across the organization. So the first step, obviously, is getting an understanding of why they need to change. And that why isn't necessarily the corporate message. The CFO's driver of reducing cost doesn't always trickle all the way down to that sub-business unit leader or manager of a department, because ultimately they need to be able to run their operation, and they have different drivers and different factors that are making them come to work in the morning and are actually paying them their salary. If you're not aligned the overall incentivization within an organization and those objectives that people are reported on, and organizations do 6 monthly reporting, annual appraisals, etc., which are tied to bonuses, which are tied to promotion, unless you make sure that those are tied into your overall transformational journey and the objectives of the organization, you don't get the buy-in across the organization that you're seeking at all levels. So that's where I spend a lot of my time in the past, coaching organizations to recognize those changes need to also happen alongside those functional changes that they're trying to undertake, be it the restructuring of a department, the closing of a data center, or the move to the cloud.
Right, and do you get much pushback on that when you're sort of, because I think what you said at the beginning, where you're saying people are paying you lots and lots of money and they just want to offload it, right? And that is the mindset, like, go fix this, which is fine if you're a managed service, which is a very different sort of gig. But if you're actually just consulting, what's the typical sort of pushback if you're going in there saying we need to incentivize the team to come on board, bonuses, for example?
I think to start with, there can be a lot of resistance. Organizations, as you say, will think, hang on a minute, I'm just paying out all this money, and now you're expecting me to also do something. And if the scope and the conversations around that haven't been clear at the beginning, that there is a dual responsibility, and it's not a outsource this and do it for me job. It's a partnership. The transformation and that change, bring a consultant in to work in partnership to drive your strategic agendas and help you achieve those strategic outcomes that you're seeking. And if you move away from the strategic and end up in just the tactical and pass that ownership to a consultancy house, thinking I'm just going to get on with my day job, it never actually transpires to deliver that return on investment that you were seeking. So initially there's always resistance, but if you can identify those benefits and actually have that conversation with the individuals so that they understand that they come into work for a reason. So if you're talking to the MD of a sub business unit, or to a senior manager somewhere in the organization, and they recognize that actually they've got to get up in the morning and come to work because they come to work to live. They come to earn a salary so that they can pay for their children to go to school, or to buy the holiday, or to drive the car at the weekend on the track, whatever it is that motivates them. Those are the reasons they're doing something. There are going to be different motivators for other people across the organization. When people start to recognize that, they start to actually buy in more to the fact that you need to change those factors that you are measuring them on, so that they can still achieve those personal goals. Ultimately, we come to work to achieve a personal goal, but we are part of a corporate machine.
Yeah, David, that must resonate with you. I mean, that's the challenges James is facing there with senior execs to enforce change is the same challenge you're helping coach people through daily.
Yeah, I think the key word in there, Nick, is probably the enforced change. If you've got to try and enforce change on people, you'll have 40 down. This isn't a client, but I do reference them occasionally on these shows. I have a business leader who last week called their senior management team in, shouted at them all, told them they were disloyal, that they were toxic, that they were the biggest threat to the future of the business, and then kicked them out of the office, followed up by an email that said exactly the same thing. If you've got to tell people to be loyal, you're probably the writing's on the wall that you need to go. Like, as a business leader, if you're saying you're not loyal to me, I've been loyal to you, but you haven't been loyal to me, you've got a fundamental problem there that is a lot of toothpaste to put back in the tube. Reflecting on it as I did, not that they're a client, thank goodness. But with those kind of things, you've got to take people on a journey. If you say to somebody, you've got to change, most likely they'll just kick back at you and go, no, I'm perfectly fine. I'm happy in my life. And I've got no reason to change, no desire to either. The human brain is actually almost hardwired to not change that much unless it has to. So you've got to take people on that journey. You can't just go, this is what I'm doing, everyone's got to get on board with it. And it takes time initially, but saves you so much time going forward. So much. I mean, it's the difference often between success and failure, actually. But you've just got to take people on that journey with you. And if they're not on that journey, you've got to spend time getting them on that.
Yeah, and James, you must have. I mean, it's quite a hard line you've got to draw with clients on them to get them on board here. What's your background in leadership that sort of got you to this point?
Well, I suppose the piece that I learned was my military background. I started off my career as an officer in the British Army. And one of the key things that always resonated with me is that service is about, leadership's about service. It's not about, direction in that sort of dictatorial manner. One of the things that you get taught when you're a young subaltern is that you take your food last and all your soldiers should feed before you. And it's a bit of a story, because ultimately everybody eats at the same time, ideally. But realistically, what that's saying is that actually putting others before yourself, and putting yourself in their shoes and considering how they're going to be feeling, and making sure that you're leading people and lifting them up. So my leadership experience from the military was actually, my success is backed on other people lifting me up and doing great things around me. And to enable people to do great things, you've got to help them and support them and coach them, and then you'll end up being seen as doing great things as a result. So I think a lot of the successes that I've seen in big transformation programs, where I've been credited for those transformations and changes, it's actually been the people around me that have been doing the great stuff, and I've been working with them to make sure that they've been motivated, that the drivers and the reasons that they want to undertake that work have been met. So if they do want to go on a Wednesday to go and see their school football match for their son playing football, you give them that opportunity, because that then reinvests them back into the fact that you understand that they have a life and they want to work, but they also want to live. So that's my background from the military. I think is about people.
Perfect. Tom, that resonates with you a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, 100%. I think service leader. servant leadership is absolutely what it's all about. I mean, I've always thought that there's one of me and 100 of them. Then do I focus on what I'm doing, or do I focus on what other people are doing? 100% about what other people are doing. So I guess there's a couple of comments on what James kindly shared with us. I think it's important up front to define what the service level agreement is, and in terms of you're doing this and we're doing that, because that then sort of defines the way of working. I think then from that point, in terms of getting the engagement, I think it's then a question of defining the what and the how. Again, we're very much with a servant heart to let the individuals, as Jane just said, develop their own plans in their own way. It's very, I've noticed on a lot of IT projects in particular, reporting can become very restrictive and very, do this and do that and try to fit things into boxes. And I give people a lot of space in terms of how they create their plans. Which actually quite often jars with organisations, but actually that's where the money is actually, particularly in sort of tech businesses that I've worked in. I think the other part of this is also up front defining what good looks like, because if you're going to add any value, you've got to deliver something that they don't see, and that's this sort of unknown thing on any project. So James, in terms of what's the proposition, talked about the ROI and stuff. That's always beyond the client's experience, and so. And you've got to deliver that. And I think the simple thing I always say to my team is that none of us create any PowerPoint, right? So none of us ever create PowerPoint. And the client creates stuff. I mean, I think PowerPoint's a waste of time anyway, but all reports. And the point is that it's the client that produces the work. Because the minute you take ownership of that, then you've just lost ownership. And I think there's loads of big IT programs in the public sector, which I know pretty well actually, where they've completely lost ownership of these things. I think as well, you mentioned data. I think there's a lot of obsession with data, James, on IT projects, when in fact common sense actually works pretty well. You can very often lose sight of the objective through too much data. And I think there's almost this disassociation from responsibility in terms of collecting data when it's just sodding obvious. The other thing is, out of this, in letting people do their own stuff, you want to leave a legacy. So when you walk away, the wheels aren't going to fall off. And that then, you touched on the leadership bits there, James. I think there's that a lot of these projects are led through technical expertise, when in fact, in terms of delivering value in the way we're talking about, there's actually a lot to do with leadership, and so knowing how to move between mentor, which the technical expertise, sharing the director, which is confirming objectives. So within your framework, you do need to set objectives, but they need to be clear, and you need to give people the space. So within that, they've got autonomy, but somebody's got to set out how these things work. And I think the last thing, I think the real challenge with a lot of consulting projects is, if it's on a day rate basis, there's always an incentive to commercially to drag it out. And I've had lots of senior off the record discussions with chiefs of consulting programs talking about how they drag out projects, when in fact what good looks like for me is the quickest I can get in and out, the better, to get the maximum return on investment. So there's that weird paradox. And actually, when I deliver programs, very often say, well, I've delivered I've got a business back to profit in 2 weeks, which just sounds ridiculous, but that's by getting some of this stuff right. And actually, I had no interest in being there 6 months, but I could have been there 12 months or whatever. But actually, so I think there's that commercial thing around delivering results versus the fees aspect of projects, which is always a source of aggravation. I guess the last thing I'd say, well, maybe not the last thing, I'd probably talk for weeks on this, but I try not to. But the last thing is around the client engagement. The difficulty with, I think, consulting engagements, it's quite easy to cherry pick. So when you come up with your list of solutions, a client will pick X, Y, Z, when in fact it's normally a combination of those things that actually deliver the end result, James. So you might only get into a sort of, or they might only implement 1, 2, and 3 without 5, 6, and 7, which are, where the whole thing hangs together. So you can often get into a slightly interesting discussion around, results at the end of these projects. So there we are. That's a few thoughts, maybe.
Yeah, and Jay, around one thing that always fascinates me is there's so many different communication channels, and this all comes back to clarity of communication, right? And mission. Do you have any preferred channels for actually communicating with people? Because I'm currently overseeing a project where there's a Teams group, there's a Slack group, there's a WhatsApp group, there's a 1,000 emails, and you're like, this is a role for someone in the middle just to collate this information between about 200 techies. How do you try and bring it all together?
I think communication is one of those really actually surprisingly difficult arts. People think communication's easy. It's about just creating a whole load of emails and firing them out. But actually, I think communication is twofold. You have that element of it, of creating those emails, of creating that content, and you've got the other side of it, the engagement, the two-way part of the conversation. So for me, communication is a broadcast message, but actually engagement is a two-way conversation where you listen and absorb and understand the point of view and the comments made by other people, and you then come back with an informed response. So it's a you said, we did type of approach. So you understand the challenges that are happening within an organization, and you make sure that you engage. Now, engagement is difficult, especially at the moment in COVID, where we're having to do this sort of thing with Skype and Teams and the like. So I still believe that actually we are much better if you can actually pick up the phone or pick up a video and have a bit of a face-to-face or a verbal conversation with someone. I think emails end up losing stuff in translation. They can be interpreted wrong. You say something in a slightly short sentence, and somebody takes offense of it, or feels like you're shouting at them, or telling them off, or the like, which is not necessarily the intent of the message, and that can break down relationships. So I think building a relationship and actually having a rapport with people is key to communication. And that also means that you as a consultant are not responsible for communicating to everybody. Again, taking that ownership and that servant leadership piece. I mean, consulting is very much servant leadership for a client, helping them achieve things, and helping them to achieve that communication and that engagement within their organization. So again, that coaching, that mentoring that Tom picked up on with those senior leaders, and making sure that they are communicating. So again, it's not about them then just sending out an email with their signature block on the bottom because they've got a senior job title. They've actually got to engage with their organization and with their management. And as David pointed out, if you've got to the point where you're starting to tell people that you've lost trust or loyalty in them, then the chances are you probably weren't engaging properly in the first place. And that's an area that you as an organization you should really focus on. Ultimately, it's the people that make the organization and its success. And that's all the way down. People don't come to work if there isn't a janitor because the toilets aren't clean. They're important too, and understanding that, recognizing the importance of everybody across the organization and engaging with them to drive the best out of them is a key part of the leadership process.
Yeah, and one of the days I see is that we're all the sort of top performers all want to give extra value, right, in the process, and are also very proud of the fact they deliver on projects. They don't let clients down, but that does open the door to clients taking and straying from the brief. So the most of the stuff we see, we get brought on, for example, is where a consulting piece is broken down, and it usually is because they didn't price it correctly, or they allowed too much additional areas to float into the brief, right? Which makes your current new role really interesting of actually justifying the spend to start with, and actually understanding what the spend really is. I mean, that's really powerful. But what have you ever encountered a point where a client has sort of taken advantage and you're so off brief that you need to bring it back? And if so, how would you try and realign? Or have you had a client where they've gone through this process of failing to communicate properly, and you've been brought in sort of halfway through? What's your approach to something like that?
I've had the second of the two scenarios where the failing to communicate has been the case. But I think the key to it all is to understand the strategic outcomes that are being sought. My experience has been that a lot of failing projects are because they've been looking at a tactical outcome. So we've got to move to the cloud. We're going to close these data centers and consolidate, and we're going to move our applications to the cloud. It's a bit of a generic example, but the point is that's the objective. When you start talking to them, you go, well, what are you trying to achieve? Well, we're trying to close the data centers and move to the cloud. But why? Why is your organization looking to undertake this transformational journey? What are the outcomes at a business level that you're seeking to achieve? Oh, well, we think it's going to save us cost. Okay, well, what is it that means you're trying to drive cost out of your business? You know, are you looking at CapEx reduction, or are you looking at OpEx reduction? What are you intending to do with that improved CapEx ability, or with your improved OpEx and balance sheet? Where is that money going? What are you trying to achieve as an organization? Because there's no point actually undertaking that if you then don't take that next step in your transformational journey, in that strategy for your organization to drive value. You know, ultimately an organization may be looking to seize market share, or to be more agile so that it can release a product more quickly and compete with its competitors. Everything you do needs to be lining up with that strategy so that you can increase the revenues that you're getting and the profit margins that you're making within the organization. Just moving to the cloud isn't going to necessarily achieve that. So coming back to that cost piece and understanding what your total cost of ownership is, you know, a lot of people go, moving to the cloud is going to be cheaper. Well, 99 times out of 100, it isn't cheaper if you do it on a like-for-like basis. It becomes cheaper when you start to look at economies of scale and rationalization, and decreasing the number of applications that you're supporting, and managing the flexibility of that environment to meet the needs of your business. Then you start to see that return on investment for those sort of transformations. If you just think that by doing something because it sounds like a great idea, and there are a lot of organizations out there that will come and sell you it because it's going to be the magic pill to, you know, your IT services or whatever it is that you're trying to do, then, you know, you're on a hiding to nothing. You've got to be looking at, where does your organization need to go long term, and why am I doing this?
I totally agree. It seems in some business almost peer pressure to be just doing transformations, right? But no real understanding of, like, is there actually any benefit? You know, a 12-person office who work remotely in the countryside, who think they need to be in the cloud. It's like, well, you could still be on a piece of tin with a nice remote login, and you get the same, you get the same outcomes and same security. It's there is that pressure. And David, do you see that across in your world, with just that sort of fixated mindsets of actually an idea of what could be good rather than actually analyzing, is it what's best?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking probably every day. I think, I mean, going back to sort of James's interesting about sort of, you know, a fitness, you know, instructor, sort of why, you know, getting a personal trainer or something to hit your fitness goals. If we just use that analogy again, a really good personal trainer, if someone comes to a personal trainer and says, I want to get fitter, 100% of personal trainers can take their cash. Like that's easy. The really good people are going to find the motivations behind, and it's usually 3, 4, 5 questions just underneath the surface. So what do you mean by get fitter? Well, I want to lose a bit of weight. Okay, that's slightly different, but okay. Why do you want to lose the weight? Well, I'm getting married in 5 weeks' time, and I want to, yeah. And when you get into it, you're actually finding the why, and that's going to be the motivation to do or not to do, in actual turbocharging them. You know, the motivation to change. But if you just go on a surface level thing of, I want to get fitter, or I should go on the cloud, or whatever, you're not actually, when push comes to shove and you need to, you know, get people to change and get on board with things, they're not, because they're not actually sure as to why they're doing it. Whereas if you say to somebody in a gym, right, we're going to do this exercise because this perfectly aligns with your goal, and it's going to be this, and this is how it's going to make you feel now, but in 5 weeks' time, you're going to look like this, you get people on board. Same in a business. If you go, right, we've got to all go through a bit of pain initially to do whatever it is that we need to discover, but that's going to allow us to make the best decisions going forward. Then everyone's on board with it. I think it's when people aren't, as James was really clearly saying, when people aren't clear on their outcomes, or when they think they're clear, but they actually haven't thought through their thinking, that's where you get a lot of problems. Yeah,
and I imagine it also comes to understanding the negative impacts of not taking these choices, right? Actually thinking that.
And that can, again, that's the sort of real driver for change. I mean, how, you know, we've all heard those stories of people who, you know, for years have been trying to quit smoking, and, you know, no matter what government, you know, puts what logo on the side of a cigarette packet or message, people still smoke. And the number of people who, you know, their little kid comes in and goes, oh, Dad, isn't smoking bad for you? You know, I want to see you when I'm an adult too. Otherwise you might be dead. Like, right, and they never smoke another cigarette again, because suddenly the motivation's there to not do it. and that away from motivation can be very, 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 very powerful.
Yeah. What do you err towards, Tom, in relation to what David just said there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Go back to some of the things you said, Nick, around how do you execute big complex projects of 200 people. I think the answer is simplicity. When I'm looking at projects, I always look at where the interfaces are. So Joe Bloggs is doing this, and it's going to take that long, and how does that fit in with this, and manage those interfaces, or at least understand where those links are, because and it's important someone owns that, which is beyond the scope of the individuals. I think then it's a question of putting the reviews in place, so there's a place for everything. So there's a review. The point of getting together is to improve decision making. I think the whole people side of this, which James just touched on, is absolutely critical. And no, great job, James. You've raised the bar in terms of these conversations. It's great. But I think it's about acknowledging people for who they are, listening to them, and all those things that you just talked about. Otherwise, you fundamentally get a lack of communication, and you get unpredictable results and unpleasant surprises. And for sure, you do not want unpleasant surprises. And one of the caveats I put in there, so look, I make it quite clear I don't like unpleasant surprises, right? And in fact, the only thing that anybody can really do wrong on a project that I'm working on is not to tell me about something unpleasant, which of course requires courage. And so I have to be approachable. So how do I make myself approachable so that people tell me that? I think and then I look out for things that drop between the gaps. So a discussion might take place and something crops up. Oh shit, where does this live? And so then I allocate responsibility so it doesn't come back to me. It's within the organization. So, and I think the other part of this is around the administration of this, because simple things like if you have a meeting, you send out the minutes straight away. Otherwise, there's a delay or a misunderstanding, and that can cost a lot of time because people are going away from a meeting, not being 100% clear on, or having their own view of what happened. And so, I always, and I will knock out, if you ever ask me to knock out minutes, they'll be second after the meeting, for that very reason, because those delays cost a huge amount of time. And particularly, I've run aircraft, designing aircraft, which is pretty critical. So you can't afford those delays, because those delays literally can be, cost lives, aircraft falling out of the sky or something. I think the last point is around what you talked about, around this cloud, this mantra or the generalization of the client wants to move to the cloud, which that's a generalization. And what you responded to, James, was IQ rather than EQ. So very often people respond to that with an IQ type discussion, which is actually quite confrontational, rather than saying this is a generalization, right? Just let's understand it, which is what David then started to talk about. It's critical to get to those specifics, and that's when you can have a meaningful discussion. But these generalizations, it's not an IQ related discussion. They create distortions and deletions. So you might be wanting to have X, Y, Z to achieve and everyone's still obsessed on this, let's move to the cloud thing. And until you address that, you trust me, you can have an IQ related discussion. Unless you deal with the EQ aspect, say, look, this is a flawed statement, they acknowledge that, and then chuck it in the bin and then become specific, you find that things go back to where they were. So that's a couple of comments, Nick, which I hope are helpful.
Yeah. And James, what would you add to hearing Tom and David's points there?
Well, there's not much to add, to be honest. I think they've picked up on all of the key points. I think Tom's point there around the IQ and EQ piece is absolutely relevant. So, the IQ piece means that you're often having that conversation at a very functional level. The EQ piece, it comes back to, as David highlighted as well, it's about people. The people will do the change for you. The people are the ones that are going to be driving your operation of your organization forward. They're the ones that are ultimately making you the money, because they're going to be driving those services for your customers. They're going to be creating the goods that you might be selling, or whatever it is that you are doing. The more effective, the more efficient they are, the more motivated they are to drive cost out of your business and to undertake that change, the better that transformation is going to go. So moving it towards that EQ conversation and understanding what, why, when, how, who, etc., becomes very key in driving successful transformation.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, we've used this personal trainer analogy a fair bit. The best personal trainers I know, if you miss a session, they drop you, right? Which I know we don't have. It takes a point in our lives to get to a point where you can dictate terms like that. But at what point is your sort of walk away? Is there points on a project where the client's not engaged in a way where like, look, we just need to walk away from this? Where's the line you draw from being able to see a successful project?
I think, you know, from my perspective, there isn't a specific line, because it depends on each organization and each transformation and what it is that you're undertaking. I think you get to a point where you've got, you know, the experience behind you from previous engagements to understand where that line is. Obviously, you understand where that's going to be in terms of, you know, the reputational risk to you and your organization as the consultant delivering. But also you understand where actually that relationship with the client isn't going to be productive anymore and you've got to step away. So I think that it really does depend on what you're doing and who the client is. You know, I haven't had, thankfully, a circumstance where I've had to do that, because I've been able to work with those leaders of those organizations closely enough to drive that transformation forward. Don't get me wrong, there have been occasions where it has been a bit of a bumpier road, and that, you know, the client has been, you know, more resistant, or that you found other elements within the organization that have been more resistant, and it's taken more time and effort to be able to break down those resistors and to build up those relationships and to move to that EQ based conversation. But actually, you know, I haven't had to walk away in that environment. So, you know, I'm very grateful for that. And, you know, it's down to the people around me and those conversations with those leaders and their willingness to adapt and to change and to accept those differing views and to move away from those IQ type conversations that Tom highlighted earlier.
Perfect. And final question for you. As we've been in this sort of COVID environment and doing all this stuff remotely, how are you seeing future leaders being developed remotely? I mean, hopefully we'll be all back together, but how has it impacted you and your teams for being able to develop others underneath you in this kind of remote environment?
I think, you know, whilst you didn't have necessarily, when you were doing the face-to-face, such a formal structure with regards to meetings, etc., because you might be in the same place and therefore you would pick up with a subordinate and might have the coffee at the coffee point or a quick chat and understand, you know, what they were doing, how they were getting on, other factors. We don't have that luxury at the moment, and hopefully that will come back. So I think that it's moved to a slightly more formal structure of making sure that you've got regular check-ins and space in your diary to spend that time having those conversations. So I think, you know, my diary has become, you know, slightly more focused around making sure that I'm giving specific time in my diary during the week to pick up the phone or to pick up the Skype or the like and have a video chat with my team, and not necessarily about what's happening in a specific program, more about them and what's happening in their lives and what's motivating them on a day-to-day basis. You know, what things are driving them forward, what do they want to achieve? Because I think if you recognize that they're also sitting at home, you know, not necessarily seeing people and lacking that interaction, you start to put yourself back into their shoes. And that is a key part in that EQ piece, is to understand those individuals and what's motivating them, and to listen to, you know, their gripes and their moans and the other factors, and look at how you as a leader can support addressing those. So I think, you know, then tying in things like objectives to personal goals, not just to the organizational strategic goals, is a key way of keeping those people on board and also driving them forwards. So I took a conversation, I can use one of my team as an example. I had a conversation the other day because, you know, he's been at home, he's been isolated, he's in Texas, away from all of our team. You know, he's miles away from all of our team. Normally he would travel, but at the moment he can't. So there's nobody around at all. He can't even potentially walk into town and meet up with someone. So one of the things he was struggling with is the fact that because he is so at home, he's spending all of his time at home. He wasn't getting out, he wasn't going for a walk, he wasn't doing any exercise. And he was starting to feel lethargic, he was feeling overweight, etc. And I said, okay, well, take some time and put it in your diary, block it in your diary that you are going to be on a Tuesday and a Thursday morning late. You're going to be online at 9:30 rather than 8:30 in the morning, because you're going to go and do some exercise. Put it in your diary. And I did that because I recognized that if I can get him to feel more energetic and more motivated, that's going to improve his productivity. And at the moment, whilst people are isolated, maintaining people's motivation is going to be key to maintaining their productivity as part of your team. He then wrote about that to the rest of our team and to the wider organization to say, this is fantastic. Someone actually took the time to give me the opportunity to look after myself. And we've seen a big change in his overall demeanor as a result.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I think that booking in time to simply replace those spontaneous moments you'd have, right? Banging into someone, having a coffee, where in those moments you don't go straight into a project chat, do you? You just go, how are you, right? And we are definitely all missing those like, how are you moments, those personal connection moments. So, and in management, we've got to structure that in. We've got to take a management view on it and go, right, this is my half an hour of like just about you, how you doing, and that's it. And I think that's key and critical. James, Tom, David, thank you so much for your time today. Pleasure as always. James, I could speak to you for hours on this, because I know we've only just scratched the surface of some of your leadership experience and what you've dealt with before. But thank you to everyone there. Thank you to everyone at home for signing up, subscribing, hitting the like buttons on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, all the places it lives. We will keep providing content for you. But otherwise, thanks to everyone at home, and we will speak to you all soon. All the best. Bye-bye.